Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Here we are.
Guys.
What's up, everybody? Another coffee talk.
Yeah.
Another coffee talk. This one's a little different. We're going to be taking a step out of the technology a little bit, and we definitely will be touching on technology throughout this because that's core to this movement. But this one's about blockchain, the state of the enterprise. We've got myself, Mr. Jorgensen, and Mr. Goldman, the three that I feel have played a large role in interfacing with enterprise outfits. I know that over the last year, we've been sort of silent over what we've been sharing about our engagements. But the reason why we're excited to present this is we've had well over 100 calls with major enterprise outfits. I'm not going to name names for their own protection, but it's been a big learning. And out of all that, I think it's great to share with the community and people like what we've learned, as well as what we've seen from some of our friendlies in the industry that have had the same sort of experience around enterprise. So this is going to be a very collaborative talk. So you're going to hear from all three of us because all of us have a little bit of a different point of view. And so let's dive in. What do you guys say?
Awesome. Let's do it.
Sounds good. That was great.
All right. Cool. As far as the agenda, we're going to be going through the industry timeline, public versus private blockchain networks, the focus on research and development, blockchain as an API, which is pretty interesting and cool.
Diggles,
accelerating.
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't see you on my screen. Ben, do you see it?
I don't see it either.
You don't see the
presentation.
No.
There we go.
Awesome.
Oh, that's weird. Like I'm not allowed to share it if it's in present mode, apparently. That's okay.
Cool.
Well, then you're going to see my misspelling, folks. So as far as the agenda, we're going to be going through the industry timeline, public versus private blockchain networks, research and development, blockchain as an API, accelerating new standards, key blockchain solutions. We're going to talk about exchanges, wallets, and cryptocurrencies, how they fit into the enterprise, what the blockchain Holy Grail is that a lot of people may be missing that we've learned about, as well as the importance of community. Diving into the industry timeline, I mean, what's cool is that Ben Jorgensen on the call is who brought me into this. My background was I was working with Oracle, and he could tell that I was kind of dying of boredom in many ways and said, you need to get involved in blockchain. And I'm really glad he did. Gave me a chance to meet people like Mathias and get really smart on this technology. I've been trading Bitcoin since 2012. I don't know. You're pretty OG too, Mathias, right?
Well, pretty much, yes. I've had my first Bitcoins either late 2010 or early 2011, something around that time. I don't even remember. Yeah.
But I largely didn't understand the technology. I just understood the crypto and wow, I don't even think I understood that. Let's be honest. But I think it's interesting is that in 2012, how early Coinbase jumped into the game to be the first like true, like sustainable, accessible wallet. And then another big thing was Ethereum came out in 2014. Also, R3 was formed in 2014, and they really pushed the focus around the consortium model and got a lot of these legacy financial companies on board. 2015 is when Linux Foundation unveiled Hyperledger. That was a big deal for them to kind of put their name in the hat. I'm sure many people saw some of the IBM kind of like Super Bowl blockchain commercials. They're like, we are blockchain. It was very mysterious and esoteric, and nobody really understood what the hell it meant. And then 2017 is where applications and ICOs began. I mean, it was crazy over 2017, 2018. Over 4,000 ICOs raised upwards of 12 billion, and 55% of them failed within the first 180 days, which is unbelievable. And 2018, Gartner found that only 1% of ICOs indicated any kind of blockchain adoption within their organizations. I think it was something like only 5% only said that they had it on their roadmap of consideration. But then something really shifted in 2019, like a real crazy shift where big names are all of a sudden, we now see the viability of this. We're leaning in. Amazon launched blockchain as a service. Salesforce introduced their blockchain offering. Facebook, Libra blockchain came out. Their token, JP Morgan Blockchain Center of Excellence. I mean, 2019 is where things have been really heating up. I feel like we got past a lot of kind of the
Right.
early stuff. Is there anything you
Right.
guys feel like is missing from this?
Yeah, I mean, not missing. I have just a couple of comments, and what I really find interesting, if you look at the timeline purely in terms of the years as they progress, I mean, it literally took 10 years for things to develop. And even if you look from the start of the Bitcoin white paper to when Ethereum is founded and when R3 is formed, and actually real enterprise engagement comes into the space, because Coinbase was very small back then. I mean, you can't call that enterprise engagement at that time when they were founded. So it still takes 8 years before IBM, goes live with the blockchain initiatives. And that's a very interesting timeline in terms of, how long does it take for a technology that is really novel to get into the enterprise conversation and for enterprise to act on. And I think we'll have a little bit more to say on that side later when we talk about sales cycles and things. So I just find that very interesting.
I also love that you put Gartner at 2018, because the Gartner hype cycle kind of insinuates that blockchain adoption and crypto adoption are synonymous with each other, and that in the Gartner hype cycle you have this like peak happening in 2018 in like January, February, and then it just like crashing down to the summer, and that really follows the price of the token. And then there's kind of this assumption that we're on like kind of an upward part, but I would even put it even further along because of how many, like to what Mathias is saying, like how many years there's been in terms of planting that seed. And I used to talk more about like the Gartner hype cycle, and we're at the bottom of it, and Gartner's saying that like 1% of CIOs are indicating any sort of adoption would insinuate that it's at the bottom. And a lot of this, this kind of like this industry timeline was people overselling this solution before it was even ready, and that ultimately like shifted a lot of the great projects to over release their mainnet, over release their solutions, and then everybody's like, well, it doesn't work, and they're like, well, everybody demanded that we use this, and they were saying that it would solve all the world's problems, and now and then everybody got involved and they put all this money and they saw it as a land grab, and then holy God, it was just like a release of energy that just needed to happen, where expectations were gone. And I love that you put this 2019, and that we're seeing such a positive like normalization occur. So
yeah, it's like we've hit a tipping point. Like now it's, man, there was just so much noise last year that like this is dead, everybody's losing money. And meanwhile, you had all these large institutions behind the scenes saying, okay, we know that this is viable and we're going to lean in. And then boom, 2019, all these announcements take place.
Yeah. And then there's a second thing, and I think that leads to your second question, Diggles, is, a lot of what is reflected in that timeline is also reflecting, trading and financial dynamics versus actually use case application, and that distinction between what does enterprise actually really want, how does the enterprise network actually needs to be formulated in order for them to work, versus a trend that is based on financial and trading dynamics of adoption. And that's two different things that, like Ben pointed out, that get convoluted very easily. And I think we're at the stage now where these things get kind of like divvied apart a little. So yeah.
Love it. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's head into the next point here, which, talking to anybody, this is huge. There's always a lot of arguments about, is it truly decentralized? What about the 51% protection, all that stuff. And there's definitely room for that. And I think it's important. However, kind of behind the scenes when talking with any of these groups, and this is not profound by any means, they're all looking at a private blockchain, a permission solution. How can we test the waters? How can we do something in a closed capacity to make sure that, yeah, we want to ensure that those that are joining our network, we know who they are. And then we can take the, true advantage of distributed ledger within that closed network. But I mean, I have yet to hear of a single enterprise engagement that has not been a permission solution. And that's largely what we're seeing in some of the deployment tools like Amazon Blockchain as a Service. I mean, these are all permission solutions. They're not going to open up to an open network because enterprise is still a little bit nervous about putting their data on a public chain, even though it's immutable and it's, you know, encrypted. What are your guys' thoughts on this approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's containerized instances on Amazon that you spin up, and then you have a fork of Ethereum or a fork of another network that you spin up. But the essence, you're right, it's containerized. It's not a truly open network. Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just. Go ahead, Ben.
No, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, while it's great for proof of concepts, I don't think that you're going to truly get that network effect at scale in a sustainable way. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Ben?
No, 100%. I mean, like it's almost like these permission chains are sandbox test environments, right? Like we've had a DAG up and running for permission networks for the past like 2.5 months. Like it works, but it doesn't require consensus and reputation model and all the features of Constellation because it's permission. It's private. So the big vision on all of this is not can we create permissioned use cases. We have been doing that. Many organizations are using blockchain technology in a permission capacity. But what is interesting is how, and what I think we're going to shed light on over the next bit, not today, but is how we kind of represent a business model from a permission network, and how does that relate to a network like Constellation, where the real power is within the permissionless network, and finding a way that while we have enterprise adoption on the permission network, how can we stake and represent a holding on the permissionless network to provide some sort of value and representation that correlate with the two. I don't want to get into any more of that, as that kind of releases a lot of inside information on what we're thinking. But yeah.
Well, I think it's good to probably pivot to skip the next slide and jump to slide 6, just thinking about kind of blockchain as an API. This is, I have an opinion, this is just my own personal opinion, that I feel blockchain is going to be commoditized rather quickly here. It's just going to be like this toolkit, and that really the power comes into things such as smart contracts, and the way that you invoke a distributed ledger technology within your existing stack and how you make it work. I think that a lot of engineers were freaking out thinking, are they suggesting that we rebuild our entire database structure? And the answer is no. That would be ludicrous. But these companies are seeing like, hey, how can we make an API call to get access to a distributed ledger? I used Constellation as an example. We're not a linear blockchain like you would experience with Ethereum or Bitcoin. We're a directed acyclic graph, which has a little bit different of an architecture, but the theory is still the same. You have existing systems and applications, and by triggering an API call, you can get access to the power of distributed ledger technology. And so I'm seeing companies that are trying to do sovereign ID or identity management. They're currently using a lot of stuff like biometrics and facial recognition, a lot of systems that work great in their own regard, but still need to be brought together, validated, and put on chain. And that can be done just by doing an outside API call. What do you guys think about this approach? And, with regards, I would love to talk about, kind of what I was saying around the commoditization of blockchain and where smart contracts come in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we inherently believe that the way to access a blockchain be an API amount of developer adoption. Can I pause out there
for a sec?
Yes.
You guys. Oh, okay. So for mass adoption, we need to have an easy API access to a distributed ledger technology. Chainlink is one of these projects that's getting a lot of momentum because of their ability to take data and put it on DLT. And what we are doing is that's just one component of Constellation. I mean, this comes with our team, our core engineering team's experience and going, hey, this should be easy to tap into distributed ledger technology via an API. And where I love what you were saying about what is that going to look like? Well, it's not going to be everybody's data, but it's probably going to be something mission critical in some capacity that you need another layer of security. And you need another layer of security. You need a way to tap into another network that's off premise in some capacity. So I think this is a poignant slide in like what we're trying to accomplish, but actually where the entire industry is heading. It should be easy to plug in. Some data will go on distributed ledger technology, some will go in the cloud, and it'll be up to an engineer to decide the value of that data and how it needs to be validated and where it needs to go.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, especially thinking about a company being in a position where they need, fast validation across an open network, and being able to like trigger an open network and utilize its resources within real time, I think is kind of going to be the future of like, say you needed to crunch medical records or something like that, and it needs to happen stat, or something that's mission critical when it comes to an autonomous vehicle network where lives are at stake, and they're just not getting the throughput, and they're able to just dip into certain networks and be able to get that validation or consensus at scale. I think is really exciting. I mean, that's really how Constellation is positioning itself with, like, to your point, being able to deploy within a closed scenario, but then also us building a robust network, a public network that can be, used within a company's ecosystem rather easily via that API call.
And Diggles.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to it.
Go ahead.
Kind of like, since this is a conversation about the conversations we've had, so the conversation of the conversations we've had at enterprise, like, how does that apply, right? And so I think back to that group that we're working with on the autonomous vehicle front that have a piece of hardware, and they need an easy they need an easy insurance policy around the data that they're collecting for an autonomous vehicle. And so this, how does a hardware and software team work? This is an easy example of a group going, hey, we do need this insurance policy to create this immutable audit trail around the data where something goes wrong on the autonomous vehicle. We need to look at those logs. And we need to know that third-party data source is appropriately creating that audit trail in a decentralized capacity, right? And so this is kind of, that's a perfect example of like where it would fit.
Yeah, love it. So I'm going to move over to the research and development. I think this is super key. I mean, I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. I'm sure we're all in agreement on this. I've never seen FOMO like I've seen in this industry. Like, the true fear of missing out, I think, is putting a ton of pressure on these companies. It doesn't matter if it's Oracle, SAP, any of the big guys, but then also car manufacturers, medical manufacturers, anybody that's really instrumental in infrastructure or large engagements. If they're not looking at blockchain, then they're kind of going to look stupid. Their customers are like, hey, we saw this commercial on the Super Bowl that showed that IBM's doing blockchain for supply chain management. What are you doing for supply chain management? So I put down here that the average investment that I've come to find out is between $100,000 to $2 million a year for some of these companies to essentially just have a toe in the water. And they're doing this largely through proof of concepts and pilots, not profound by any means. And we started off with monitoring of tech and developments. This has happened in the last couple of years. I think that a lot of these companies kind of seeing IBM emerge in 2017 with their offering, that this was happening around 2015, 2016. And then all of a sudden, technical proof of concept started coming out. Like, okay, how can we actually align the technology to existing use cases to see if there's a there? And a lot of those failed. I mean, I would say the vast majority from my findings and the research that I've seen in my colleagues in the industry is that 90% don't move past an initial POC. And I think it's because they don't really know what to do next. It's like, okay, great. We figured this thing out on a couple of Raspberry Pis. We got some nodes communicating, and we're validating, or connecting data. It's like, gosh, now what? But a lot of them are now scaling those POCs into pilots. Not as many has gotten past just the POCs, but these pilots, and they're forming internally. We're starting to see it within organizations that they're building organizational units or tiger teams that focus specifically on blockchain development, that are being measured on the success and the acceleration of these ideas. And that's really, I put that in a green box because that's where we're at right now. There isn't a lot of notable deployments that people can point to at scale that are changing the world. Sure, Walmart may be putting lettuce on supply chain management on chain, and sure, that's a really great start, but is that going to revolutionize and skyrocket Walmart into a completely different category, which I don't know if that's possible considering how large they are? The answer is no. But the real focus is around that sustainable blockchain ecosystems. And so we are moving from evaluation into ecosystems, and this is kind of a crunch time for continuous learning and optimization. What do you fellas have to say about that?
I have a question. So this is a really interesting and good slide because it shows the growth and where it relates to enterprise efforts. And from your experience, how do I phrase that properly? We've heard a lot about enterprise adoptions, partnerships, these marketing efforts that tout, one partnership is bigger than the next. So looking at that slide, where do you see the actual reality baseline of where enterprise partnerships are? I mean, you put it in the green box, but can you flesh it out a little more to give me or us an idea where realities versus what's actually being communicated?
Yeah, I mean, that might be appropriate for me to jump to slide 7 because I think it's a great question. And the thing that I've seen, because my background is in partnerships, I ran global partnerships for Oracle for 4 years. And, there's a lot of red tape. Everybody's competing with each other. There's a lot of IP, a lot of security, a lot of who owns the data is a big piece of, the interoperability contracts and all that stuff. And what is happening is that decentralization by its nature is forcing collaboration, forcing new, not only kind of research partnerships, but more importantly, technical partnerships to emerge. I mean, if you think about no central authority and everybody having to work together, that means that you have companies like Daimler and BMW who have traditionally been sort of mortal enemies, or Boeing and Embraer competing in a very competitive market, that are saying, oh, we need to come together in order to figure this out, because the interoperability of our data is what's going to make this thing work. That kind of goes back to that idea of the permissioned solution. Sure, you can build your own stuff internally, but if it's not communicating with others, then it really is a moot point. So the consortia play has never been more popular. In fact, I think that there's an exhaustive amount of consortias. I only put 6 logos for each of these categories because there's quite literally hundreds that I could have put on here. And these aren't even the top ones. These are just the ones that we either have worked with or I'm familiar with. But that's what I think the Linux Foundation came in early and said, hey, how do we bring companies like Microsoft and Salesforce, who may be competing in certain categories, together under one umbrella so that we're focused on the standards? And standards is really what's going to make this stuff work. And that involves governments, cities, venture funds, as well as academia. Academia is playing a really big part on the research, and everybody's contributing. Brian Bellendorf from Hyperledger, the executive director, he has a quote that blockchain is a team sport, which I really like. But it's requiring these companies to come together in order to create those standards and bring true solutions. I mean, when you're talking supply chain management, you can't have 50 different blockchain solutions out there. And there may be, for specific industries, there may be applications that are specific in supply chain management, but underneath it, they need to be abiding by certain standards that have been agreed upon in a collaborative way. That's what I've been seeing.
So you could say, in other words, an API is needed to connect to the blockchain, but the blockchain should be the global API to connect all these puzzle pieces.
Agnostic, 100%. Yeah, it can't be an API call to connect to the Google blockchain. And maybe that it would be a blockchain that's what I love about Ethereum, Hyperledger, R3. And I mean, it's just kind of like the litmus test. Like if you're putting out something that is a foundational tool and you're not coming at it with the collaborative mindset, then you are centralizing your solution, you know, like, and it's going to be sniffed out. Ben, I would love to know what your thoughts are on this, just because, you know, we could talk about the government grants if we'd like and see what they're going after, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you guys dive into a lot of that, but I mean, generally, I think the entire space is at a more of a research phase, and collaborating with intellectuals, academia. It's not at a point of mass adoption, and I think it will be for another 5 years. And so everybody's trying to figure out where they all fit, and at the same time, there's such a huge level of research that really needs to be done. And going across the board, I think the enterprise sector is less exciting. So the small, medium-sized, and enterprise businesses, the SMEs, I think it's less exciting because they're motivated by monetary means, right? And the monetary means basically say, well, are my customers asking for blockchain? But they want to hear it on earning reports. Public companies mention blockchain on earnings reports and say we're exploring this because it creates a positive sentiment that you're looking at the future. However, the interest in a monetary means is not that, it's not been fully fleshed out as a like, oh, we have to buy this product, right? Out of the box right now in this space that's saying like we have to buy this. And so if you take another step back, it's let's research all the capabilities, let's provide that research, and government can play a huge role in guiding that simply because they don't have that monetary stake, but they have the interest. They're supposed to have the interest of the public in creating a safe world, whatever that may be, and however you want to negotiate that. They aren't held to, well, we have to make this commercially viable and make money off of this today. And so those alignments of intention ultimately create kind of what triggers each of these different these groups, if you will.
Yeah, I think that was so well said. I mean, you're absolutely right. Are our customers asking for blockchain? And the answer is no. But from an optics perspective, we need to look innovative. So we need to show that we're getting involved. And I think that by people going through that lens of FOMO or fear of missing out has actually gotten them hooked on the possibility, like, oh, this actually can be transformational to our company. Let's put some more gasoline on it. And to the point of the government grants, I mean, look, working with the US Air Force as an example, they have so many siloed legacy systems, you know, and it's by design. You know, they have a thing called multi-domain command and control, which is a proposal that we've worked on and that we're going to be working on with them in practice, is that they have groups that are running the military troops on the ground, the satellites, you know, all these different areas that make up the Department of Defense, but they're siloed by nature because they want to keep their rules of engagement very focused. But when it comes to interoperating that data so they can make real-time moves, and whether that's in combat or resolving any type of conflict, it's extremely manual, and it's almost damn near impossible from a legacy system perspective. So they see all of a sudden distributed ledger technology can create a data marketplace for them in a sense, maybe not from kind of a revenue perspective, but from an ability to react. So that's where we've been seeing a lot of that come out from the government side.
Awesome.
Jumping into the key blockchain solutions, I really like this slide. We don't need to like dive into each of the bullets here. I think it's just more for those that would like to read it. You know, Ethereum, Hyperledger, definitely being the strongest. I feel like the majority of the solutions I talk to, they're like, yeah, we're built on, you know, Ethereum, or we're built on one of the flavors of Hyperledger. I mean, IBM, you know, one of their kind of dirty secrets is that they don't have really any IP. They were a major contributor to Fabric, but Fabric is part of the Hyperledger project, and they are specialists, but they look at it as, hey, can we stitch together some of these open source solutions that are part of trusted consortia or groups like Hyperledger or the Linux Foundation, and come up with a solution specific for the use case of the customer we're solving. The reason I like R3 is because they're focused on connecting distributed ledger technologies to other enterprise systems. And there's a huge play there, which is like, hey, you have your existing systems, going back to kind of the API, blockchain is an API call. And how do we make sure we're making the most out of that versus coming at it thinking you're gonna have to rebuild everything. But taking a step down to the next layer, which I think is a little bit more interesting and a little less mature than the top row there, Amazon getting into blockchain as a service and Azure doing much of the same, is they know that a lot of these enterprise customers are utilizing many of their back-end management tools and these manager services. Same with when we talk about Cloudera or Databricks. These are solutions that enterprise rely on. So instead of them dipping out to some startup or new group, they're going to go to Azure and say, hey, who are you bundled with or integrated with for faster deployment, so we're already connected to our pre-existing systems. So blockchain as a service isn't a unique intellectual property that Amazon has, but rather a faster to deployment model. And Salesforce is kind of taking a chapter out of that playbook and saying, hey, how do we create what they're calling low code blockchain platform, this drag and drop ability? So going back to the API call, where you can actually get some of those solutions very quickly, but they're aligned with that extending the power of CRM, as they say, because of course they want it to benefit themselves. So it's a little bit of a different lens. But the one thing that all three of these have in common is that underneath they're still pulling from largely those systems that you see at the top there. Do you guys have anything you want to say on that before we talk a little bit about Libra? Because I think it has its own special place here.
I do think that the open source community I shouldn't say the open source community, open source solutions are part of the DNA of what makes blockchain companies. And, Hyperledger's tried to do this in creating this like open source blockchain community, much like they did with Linux. And one of the key things in this whole space is that the technology mainstream attraction, right? It doesn't have the infrastructure support to really create anything meaningful. And so I think that we need to almost go back a step and say, hey, key blockchain solutions have an underlying reliance on creating open source communities. And these open source communities have kind of had lackluster tooling for developers to build because it's just not up to par. And there's so much value to extract from the open source community. I mean, look at Hadoop and what Hadoop did. At the early days, the use cases around big data were super limited, and big data was seen as like just a Twitter. And where that community and having these tools that kind of like, yeah, it's for big data, but this is how it evolves, and these are how companies are going to use it in the future, and seeing an adoption of a community come across enterprise organizations was how Hadoop got so much traction. It was the individual developers in these enterprise organizations were able to latch onto true open source technology that could scale in perpetuity and see a future of like, oh, we have all this data. We need some way to organize it. We need infrastructure tooling. And the great thing about Hadoop is that it was there to scale, and it had to create more and more use cases that were developed further by their developers. And so when we look at blockchain solutions, people are so quick to solve a problem when going, hey, what are the features and characteristics of open source, and how can we apply that developers will find some sort of meaningful tooling and grow this thing in perpetuity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it'd be good to just touch on Libra because it's kind of a hot topic right now. And I mean, I personally think it's something to be a force to be reckoned with, if you will. It's funny when you think about the 28 major companies that have paid 10 million each to be a part of it. My wife calls it the Parade of Nightmares. And I think it's a great name. Those that don't understand, those 28 companies, that 10 million basically makes them essentially valid node operators and validators as part of the network. So they will make that money back if this thing takes off. And they're looking to cap it out at 100. But what makes everybody's palms sweat is that this really could be coined the Illuminati coin, if you will, because we're talking Visa, PayPal, like Uber, I mean, and Andreessen Horowitz. So there's so many big players that are involved. These are the most powerful companies in the world coming together under one guise of Libra. And really, it's a play around the wallet. I've always been saying that all of this doesn't really matter unless somebody really adopts wallets and people have the ability to store and trade values, whether that's a wallet that lives inside your car or if it's a wallet that's on your phone, if you have your medical records or whatnot. And when you think about Facebook's offering like WhatsApp and Instagram and Messenger, these are like a Trojan horse approach to take their Calibra wallet, attach it to it. And I think it's a really great thing when you think about the 1 billion folks that are unbanked that have smartphones, now have the ability to transact crypto. So I think the positive side is it's going to be good for crypto all around. I think it's going to do wonders for Bitcoin, altcoins. People are going to start paying attention to it. However, it also could get to a point where we are now using a true global currency by the leaders that we may not trust. And that seems counterproductive when you think about blockchain coming from this cypherpunk movement of, you know, anarchy in a way. And now all of a sudden it's being kind of snarfed up by these major groups. You know, Mathias, I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple. I mean, in essence, you're absolutely correct. And yeah, I just read the other day a news headline that summarizes my sentiment, and it was like, the nation of Facebook declares war on the USA. And there is a lot of truth to that, because the US government, I mean, there are arguments to be made that the Federal Reserve and all that stuff is sort of private, blah, blah, blah. There's a history to that too, but let's not get into that. So in essence, the money monopoly has to be, or has been traditionally, in the hands of a state and in the hands of government. So now when you introduce very wealthy, powerful companies that become node operators or validators in a semi-decentralized or pseudo-decentralized currency, then that's an issue. I mean, we had cases in the past, when dissidents, you get switched off your Visa account and then your financial ability is done. How can it be guaranteed that in such a world, when you do not confirm with a Western worldview, basically, or with a Western policy alignment, that any of these validators just blacklist your wallet and you're done, So there is a big promise to unbank people with just a wallet on the smartphone, and that's what's pretty much being done in China with WeChat. I mean, it's the everywhere app. I mean, most Chinese, they don't even pay with credit cards. They just pay with their phone, and WeChat has all these capabilities, and Facebook has been lagging behind those developments, and that's their play to kind of catapult themselves at the forefront and make a global claim, while WeChat doesn't make quite a global claim yet. So it's a clever play, but just from a monopoly perspective, I mean, they are in essence taking away the monetary monopoly from the US government, and that in itself is a big issue. And it's going to be very interesting to see how government responds. I mean, India has announced already that they're going to block it or ban it. There has been a request, I think, in the House to have a hearing with the Facebook executives. But on a fundamental level, I see that as a significant threat to democracy and the state monopoly.
I completely agree about all this, and I have like a negative sentiment. And I saw this a year and a half ago, and what I saw was that in our token pre-sale, there were some people that worked at Facebook. There were people that worked at Google, that worked at all these companies, that played a game that they really wanted to know the technology. And being in Silicon Valley, I knew what was going on. They were all like given stipends to go explore what's out there and find the good stuff and do the research, play in the community, take the knowledge and go back and create something. And it was like a matter of time. And that's, sorry, like I probably shouldn't even be saying this on this video, but like, it is what it is. Like that was the game that was done. They did it well. and I haven't heard from those people since. And it's just like manifests itself after a year and a half of sifting through all these white papers, getting involved, getting close to teams. It was a very manipulative tactic, and that's the nature of this whole beast.
Yeah, it's definitely weird times. You know, it's funny, to the uneducated, people are like, oh, I'm going to make so much money off Libra, just kind of attaching it to the traditional kind of new ICO mentality. But it's a stable coin. They have plans on minting when they need and burning when they need to keep it stable. So it truly will be a kind of a stable security token. So on that note, talking about enterprise and exchanges, wallets, and cryptocurrencies, there definitely is a divide. Like, talking to enterprise, they're very interested in distributed ledger technology and deployments of this kind of wonderful technology, but they start to clam up when they start thinking crypto without really understanding the value that it brings to the table. Mathias, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, I just put down as an example that there's upwards of 260 plus exchanges out there, vastly bigger number than traditional stock exchanges. I put down Binance and BW.com. Those are the two most popular as of yesterday or whenever I built this recently. These couldn't change. And then I also showed that Coinbase being an early wallet, it's the number one wallet out of hundreds out there, and then Trezor being the number one cold storage wallet. Maybe you can touch on this and also explain a little bit about the difference between security token and utility token. Then I would love to add some color on why crypto is the future, even though it currently has a shady rep.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just in general, I mean, you picked the right logos. I mean, you know, these exchange rankings, they change very quickly on a daily basis, basically, because most of it is based on transaction volume on exchange. So one day you might pick Binance as spot one on CoinMarketCap, and then the other time it's another one. So number two exchange already changed ranks at this point. So it's a fluctuating landscape of rankings, and it doesn't, especially on the exchange side, I wouldn't say it's significant who's number one or who's number three. It's just an information that there's volume that's being traded on major exchanges in the world. As for the security token versus utility token, that's kind of like I mean, the question always is, you know, blockchain challenges old laws, you know. So when blockchain came around, tokens were sold, and it was just a matter of time when financial institutions and finance law and regulations would have a say on what is happening there. And with the security versus utility question, especially in the US, that's a legislation from, I think, the 1920s. So there is the definition because of the stock boom and bust back in the days. They wanted to protect small investors, and everybody who was issuing a security had to go through that whole process of registering, and there was this process of being an accredited investor and so on and so forth. So now in the digital world, that whole framework, I mean, I wouldn't say it's obsolete, but it should definitely have some major adjustments that reflect the digital nature of our reality. So that perspective of security versus utility is more or less an artificial one, and one that's specifically valid in the US. And in addition to that, utility token is kind of like a workaround, because in the law, there is no utility token. That is just basically the flip side of not being a security, and then you can call it a utility token, but the law has no framework of a token being a utility. That is just a workaround, basically.
Well, it does it on the Howey test. The Howey test is a 3-step test of what if it looks like a utility.
That is
or
true.
A security.
That is true. But the Howey, but still, as far as I know, I mean, it might have changed by now, but as far as I know, utility token in itself is not it just says it's not a security. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But what it means in terms of the ICO bubble of 2017, everybody was issuing utility tokens, and ideally, quoting you on the Howey test, it would have a function within the network protocol. So it would either give you access to something, you could pay for something within the network. Whenever you would touch the area of dividends or shares or fractionalized ownership, then that would be more an indication of going into a security, which is more of a legal definition. So, and you also have unregulated crowd sales. And yes, that is true for most of the world, but I just want to shine the light on Constellation because that's a question that comes occasionally up in the community. So we did not do, and I repeat, we did not do an unregulated crowd sale. We did an accredited KYC investor checked private pre-sale. So we did not offer securities to investors. Investors gain access to our protocol. They can buy throughput on the network with our token, and every single investor had to go through a KYC check, and we only accepted accredited investors, which means in the US that's more than $1 million net worth or $250,000 income over 2 years time period. So I hope I don't bore you too much with that. Let's go into
I think securities are great. The security tokens are great because it's going to bring in a new class of investors to get involved in the space because they're familiar with what securities are. So when it's now that we're starting to create frameworks and companies are starting to mold into that, I think it embraces a lot more.
Okay. Love it. Yeah. And so as far as just kind of putting a bow on this slide down and the while it currently has a shady rep, crypto is the future. I think that when we look at, the internet of value or the, web 3.0 and the exchanging of values, one use case I like to look at is when we were in Munich earlier this year at the BMW headquarters and talking with these OEMs and some of the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in a really great collaborative setting. BMW announced that we're no longer a manufacturing and parts company. We are a services company. And what they meant by that is, cars dormantly sit for 97% of the time in people's garages or on the side of the road. It's the second largest investment next to a house that people make. And these things are like supercomputers with so much modern technology. But if they're able to utilize them in a way where they have nodes that are operating on a network, you can offset the cost of the car, but also increase the value of the network by participating. So that gets really exciting, and that all will take place because of crypto underneath the scenes. And crypto, it just kind of has a weird term because it says crypto, but like that's where people should get really excited, is seeing true value transfers between machine to machine in that use case that really unlocks the value of what these networks bring to the table. They go hand in glove, if you will. So while enterprise hasn't embraced it fully to its furthest extent, we'll see that roll out over the next few years. Those that do see the value, like a BMW, know that it's a centerpiece to unlocking the value of distributed ledger technology. So speaking about the blockchain Holy Grail, I think this is huge. This is one of the things that I've heard a ton. Do I need a blockchain? I love this flow chart. I think even Wyatt has this sticker on his computer. That's how often it comes up. And the answer is always no, you don't need a blockchain, because at first the hype was you can solve everything with blockchain. And that may or may not be true. But what I like to say is playing the movie forward or looking downstream a little bit. You probably do need a blockchain if you want to start looking at interoperability. The Holy Grail, if you will, and every company that we see is looking, doesn't matter if it's Air Force or if in this case, some of these OEM manufacturers, is a marketplace ecosystem, a data exchange, a new way of taking data types and bringing them together. That could be weather sensors and electronic control units within a car. They're now exchanging data in a new way, creating a new marketplace and a new ecosystem. So you think about those that are creating the data, the publishers, those that are enhancing it, creating the interoperability, and then those that are pulling it and consuming it, maybe buying it, or agencies consuming that data from the platform. Constellation's position, just to give us a shameless plug, is that we're all about validating that data. We've constantly been saying, if you got crap data coming into your marketplace, you're going to be pushing crap data out to the data consumers. So having really true validation and notarization from the onset is very important. What do you guys think about this slide? Anything you want to mention before we jump into one quick use case on it?
Yeah, I would just comment briefly on it. I mean, what you have as the Holy Grail, I always call it the $1 million question. And whenever you need to transcend membrane barriers or silos that are displayed here as brands, and interoperability is needed, and that's the use case not so many people are looking at right now. So most people are focused on these rather linear use cases. How can I increase my bottom line by notarizing contracts on a blockchain? And then you go through health tech, you go through legal tech, you go through finance. People just tick off these different use case areas, and whenever you search on Google, you find these very straightforward use cases for blockchain. And while they are fine and they do improve the bottom line, they still fall very short in terms of how does a decentralized network future actually look like, and what are the requirements. And the interesting thing is that with the connected driving and the autonomous driving, now the technology actually progresses in such a way that there is a business need emerging to connect players that have been in competition traditionally in the past, and to transform their entire business model into a data marketplace. It's not about having the BMW cars, it's more about improving the services around the cars and trading that data. And then thinking it a little bigger, so that's just in one country, right? But then if you think about Europe or the United States or the American continent as a whole, you have to have these systems running cross-border in different countries. So you could imagine that whole thing as one country node, so to speak, that then exchanges information with another country node. So these are like a fractal. They can be scaled up and down, and that's a really truly decentralized futuristic vision that needs to grow as the demand and the need for these interoperability solutions grow as well. And that's way beyond just a linear notarization of a legal contract. So
right. So just a quick call out before we wrap this up. Got a couple more slides here. I wanted to touch on one of the use cases, Constellation, to kind of drive this view home. I think you said it really great there, Mathias, around zooming out. You can take these OEMs, and then you get to connected cities and different countries. But at the very core, like a good example is we're working with an IoT provider, a major IoT provider, and one of the demos we worked on them with was spoof proofing or tamper proofing keyless entry or remote start. And of course, we could sit there 8 days since Sunday and say, oh, you don't really need a distributed ledger for this. You can use existing solutions to really lock this thing down through PIN entries and fingerprints and whatnot. However, again, going back to that term of playing the movie forward, this allows them to bring together a lot of these kind of disparate systems that are isolated into one authentication identification mechanism that interoperates that identity across their entire pipeline. And so that's like the beginning of it. And then jumping back to this, it zooms out to even more. But, that's why when we work with enterprise and them saying, yes, we're taking this very myopic use case, and you can sit there and argue that you don't need blockchain for it. It's really a long-term big vision, and you have to start small to get the group's mind wrapped around it and get the systems wrapped around it, so you can start to bring other units on, the head unit, the telematics, the user profile, and they're all underneath that one system, and it can all be called through our one API interface. So that's why I just want to have this shameless plug, because I think it really tells the story rather well. So we have one last thing that I think is, kind of a very important piece, and I'd love to hear Mr. Jorgensen talk about this in specific, because this has been very near and dear to his heart, and I think he's done a really great job. We've all done a great job of fostering a killer community, and I don't think enterprise really understands the importance of this. It's much different than having, some side community on a stock channel talking about a stock or a technology. These people are really at the core of the involvement. A lot of them have offered a lot of help, alignment, advice, and have accelerated us in a meaningful way. I mean, we think our community is an extension of our team here. So Ben, what are your thoughts on the community and your involvement?
Yeah, I mean, the community was actually one of the main reasons I got involved. And I saw the importance of it, and that goes back to what I was saying around open source, right? The reason open source technologies flourish are because of the communities that build and use it and provide feedback and lean in and own the brand around that open source. And they will go to bat and they'll create forums. And so you take those elements and you apply it to this technology. Right, there's a lot of similarities. Not only the fact that we're building open source, but the community is one of the most powerful things I've ever seen, and one of the most dynamic and craziest things. And they create the community sends us gifts when they giving to us, when they get excited about us. Like it is the momentum that builds value in the company as well as our cryptocurrency, but also within the technology and providing adoption. It's the thing that like warms my heart, you know, seeing 450 node people apply to be node validators from like freaking 70 some countries. Shows the excitement and mission that they have to see this come to life. And when I hear enterprise talk, and so this isn't like a shill on just community, but it's what I think enterprise miss and what I think venture misses as well. And I had somebody in venture go, why do you even have community? It seems that enterprise venture industries don't really understand the core part of all this blockchain technology is this like empowerment of a community to own data and to participate in something that's so much bigger than themselves, so much bigger than their country, so much bigger than their business, and yet some sort of, and it's connected through rules of engagement. And that to me is like the large part that enterprise miss. And they instead just go, hey, let's just do some open source technology. Well, people in the community like the cryptocurrency. There's some sort of value being exchanged. And we're humans. We want a value exchange to exist. So I think this is like one of the key things that enterprise miss. They're like, oh, if we just talk about blockchain, it's going to raise our stock price. And unfortunately, they missed the whole boat. And I think that we're going to see that with Libra too. Is that the community, well, crypto holders will see it as like a great way to make money, but inherently there's this kind of like, they understand that this is much bigger and that the community will build or tear you down on where you stand. So
well said. I love it. What I love about all these things is that this is stuff the community has built. Again, we feel like we're partners with them. And I don't know, it's just been one heck of a ride to see representation all over the world.
If that's a real car, I still have yet to find out if that's somebody's real car.
That'd be pretty wild.
If they do, man, wow, we've created abundance.
Good for them. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I think this was a great presentation to cover kind of our vision of the state of the enterprise. Just the last words here is to be patient for folks. That everybody's like, when is this going to happen? Why isn't it happening faster? This is complex. I mean, this is a complete different way of thinking, but you have to be vigilant. There's a lot of shade out there. And I feel like Constellation has done a really good job, or at least we've tried to be transparent and do the right thing. You know, we're not a bunch of jokers, and it's tough to express that sometimes when you're swimming in a ton of jokers out there. Another thing is to continue to focus on collaboration. Even if you think of somebody's an enemy, put down your guard and figure out a way to work together, because collaboration is what's going to make this happen. It's a big pie out there. And strap in. The world's about to change. I mean, that Libra thing is shaking a lot of people up. It's like, oh, wow. You know, it's one thing for a lot of these small companies to be emerging very quickly with a lot of capital and a lot of attention. It's another thing when you have some of the biggest companies in the world coming together to create influence in this space. So I think that we're about to see some major shifts about to happen. Is there anything else you guys would like to say before we conclude?
Couldn't said it better, Diggles.
Send us off, Diggles. That was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to be doing more of these coffee talks, and I appreciate if you've watched this long. Kudos to you. Our emails are up there if you have any questions, and continue to see great things. We're in this for the long haul. We're not going anywhere because we believe in this movement and we believe in DAG, baby.
All right.